My parents told me there was no room for me at Christmas. It was a simple sentence, delivered over the phone with the same casual indifference as telling me they were out of milk. But for me, it was the lock turning on a door I had been knocking on my entire life. My name is Olivia Kane. I'm 29 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the ghost at my family's feast. This is the story of how I stopped being invisible. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. The call happened on a Tuesday in November. I was in my office staring out at the Manhattan skyline, a wall of glass separating me from the biting wind. Below, the city was already starting to glitter with holiday lights. It was the time of year that was supposed to feel warm, full of hope and belonging. For me, it was the season of anxiety, the annual reminder of the space I wasn't allowed to fill. I took a deep breath, my finger hovering over my mother's contact number. I told myself this year would be different. I was older, more successful. Maybe this year they would finally see me. My heart hammered against my ribs as the phone rang. One ring, two. Hello? My mother's voice was crisp, distracted. I could hear the faint clinking of cutlery in the background. She was probably having lunch with my sister Clara. Hi, Mom. It's Olivia. Olivia, I was just talking about you, she said, though her tone held no warmth. It was a statement of fact. A small, foolish flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Oh yeah? Good things, I hope. Clara was just saying how you're probably swamped with work, that you never have time for family anymore. The hope died instantly. It was the same old story, the narrative they had written for me. Olivia, the workaholic. Olivia, the absent one. It was a convenient excuse to explain my absence, an absence they themselves engineered. I pushed past the familiar sting. Well, I was calling about Christmas, actually. I wanted to make sure I had the dates right for coming home. There was a short, sharp silence on the other end. I could practically hear her turning to Clara, a silent conversation passing between them. When she spoke again, her voice was flat, final. Oh, honey, about that. There's no room for you this year. I blinked, certain I had misheard. No room? What do you mean? Clara and her husband booked both guest suites for their friends from the yacht club. It's going to be a full house at the Aspen Lodge. We just don't have a place to put you. A place to put me. I wasn't a person. I was a piece of furniture they couldn't find a corner for. My throat felt tight, like I was trying to swallow a stone. I could get a hotel. I don't mind. I just want to be there. Don't be silly, she said, her voice laced with a fake, brittle cheerfulness. It would be awkward. Everyone will be paired up. You'd just be on your own. My dad's voice suddenly boomed in the background. Is that Olivia? Tell her it's better this way. You're always working anyway. Probably have to check on one of your little motels on Christmas Day. He laughed, a loud booming sound that felt like a slap. My mother joined in with a light titter. They thought it was a joke. To them, my career was a punchline, my life a footnote. To me, it was the only thing I had ever built for myself, the only place I truly belonged. A silence colder than a blizzard settled over the line. It was a silence, filled with everything they had never said. You are not a priority. You are not wanted. You do not matter to us. My hand trembled as I held the phone to my ear. I had nothing left to say. There were no arguments to make, no pleas that would change their minds. They had made their decision long before I had even made the call. Okay, I whispered, the sound barely audible. I understand. Good. We'll call you after the holidays. Maybe next time, Olivia. Love you. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, the black screen reflecting my own stunned face. She hadn't even waited for me to say it back. The words I love you felt like a reflex to her, a meaningless punctuation mark at the end of a dismissal. I placed the phone gently back on my desk, my movements slow and deliberate, as if any sudden motion would cause me to shatter. A single hot tear traced a path down my cheek. They had done it again. They had effortlessly, carelessly cut me out. But this time, something was different. The hurt was still there, a deep, familiar ache in my chest. But underneath it, a new feeling was taking root. It was a cold, hard resolve. They said there was no room for me. Fine. I would build a world so big, so magnificent, that their tiny, exclusive celebration would look like a doll's party in comparison. They thought my work was a joke. They had no idea it was about to become their reality. The phone call wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a lifetime of quiet dismissals. My family album is filled with pictures where I am on the edge of the frame, slightly out of focus, while my sister, Clara, stands in the dazzling center. The neglect wasn't loud or violent. It was a gentle, constant erosion of my presence, like the way water wears down a stone until it's smooth and unremarkable. Christmas was always the most painful, the time when the disparity was on full display. I remember the Christmas I was 10, with a clarity that still feels sharp. The air in our home was thick with the scent of pine needles and my mother's expensive cinnamon candles. The tree was a towering fir, dripping with glass ornaments and golden ribbons. Beneath it, an avalanche of presents spilled out across the Persian rug. Clara's side was a mountain. Mine was a small hill. She tore into her gifts with theatrical glee, her squeals echoing in the high-ceilinged living room. That was the year of the pony, the real, living pony. My father had arranged to have delivered to a nearby stable. Along with it came a custom leather saddle from a boutique in England and a series of private riding lessons with a former Olympian. My parents filmed the entire thing, their faces glowing with a pride so intense it was almost blinding. "For our champion," my father had said, his voice thick with emotion. I sat on the floor, a small island in their sea of adoration, and opened my gifts. A beige scarf, so generic it felt anonymous. A book on 18th century French poetry, a subject I had never once expressed interest in. My main gift was a $20 gift card to a chain bookstore. I remember holding the little plastic card, its edges sharp against my palm. I looked up, trying to catch my mother's eye. She was busy adjusting a velvet ribbon in Clara's hair. I looked at my father. He was focused on getting the perfect angle with his camcorder. I wasn't angry. I was just empty. It was the first time I understood, in a way that settled deep in my bones, that their love was a finite resource, and it had all been allocated to Clara. My gifts were not about me. They were about fulfilling a parental duty with the least amount of thought possible. This dynamic bled into every aspect of our lives. When I was in middle school, I won the state science fair. I had worked for months on a project about hydroponics, building a complex system in our basement. I remember the night of the awards ceremony. It was the same night as one of Clara's ballet recitals. She wasn't the lead. She was one of a dozen girls in the corps de ballet. My parents went to her recital. "We can't be in two places at once, Olivia," my mother had said, as if the choice was a matter of logistics and not preference. "You know how much this means to your sister." I stood on the stage, accepted my first place ribbon, and looked out at the audience, at the empty seats where my family should have been. I folded the ribbon into a small square and put it in a box. I never mentioned it again. The biggest rift came when it was time for college. For years, my father had spoken of me going to law school. "Olivia's the smart one," he'd say at dinner parties, a rare and fleeting compliment. "She'll be a Supreme Court justice one day." He wasn't interested in my happiness. He was interested in the prestige my career would bring him. Clara was marrying into wealth and status. I was supposed to earn it. When I received a full scholarship to Cornell's prestigious School of Hotel Administration, I was ecstatic. It was my passion, the one thing that was truly mine. I chose to tell them at what I thought was a celebratory dinner. Clara had just announced her engagement to Richard, a man whose personality was as bland as his family's fortune was vast. My parents were over the moon. The champagne flowed freely. My father was already talking about the wedding, the guest list, the social climb it represented. Finally, he turned to me. "So, Olivia," he said, the champagne making him expansive. "Any news from the law schools? Harvard, perhaps?" My heart pounded. "Actually, Dad, I've made my decision. I'm accepting a full scholarship to Cornell for their hospitality program." The silence that fell over the table was immediate and heavy. My mother placed her fork down with a delicate, disapproving click. "Hospitality?" she asked, the word tasting like something unpleasant in her mouth. "What is that exactly? Learning how to fold napkins?" Clara let out a condescending little laugh. "Oh, Mommy, it's sweet. She wants to run a little inn, like in the movies." "It's the best program of its kind in the world," I said, my voice tight. "I want to manage luxury hotel brands. I want to build a business." My father's face, which had been so full of cheer, had hardened into a mask of deep disappointment. He leaned back, swirling the champagne in his glass. "Olivia, this is a mistake. A huge mistake. That's not a real career. It's a service industry. You'll be catering to the whims of the wealthy your whole life. A Kane does not fluff pillows. A Kane sits on the board. A Kane argues before the court. But this is what I love," I pleaded, my passion feeling like a liability. "Love doesn't pay the bills," he said. A statement so ironic coming from a man who hadn't worried about a bill in his life. "And it certainly doesn't earn respect. Your sister is securing this family's social future. I expected you to secure its intellectual legacy. Instead, you want to be a glorified innkeeper. That was the end of the discussion. They paid for my tuition, or rather, the small amount my scholarship didn't cover, but they offered no emotional support. My 4 years at Cornell were a black hole in our family conversations. When I graduated with honors, they didn't attend the ceremony. Clara was on a pre-honeymoon trip to the Amalfi Coast, and they had, of course, gone with her. The jokes started then. At every holiday, every family gathering, my career became the designated punchline. "Here comes Olivia, the motel queen," my father would bellow as I walked in. "Make sure you don't charge us for the coats, dear." The worst part was the way I learned to smile through it, to play along. I would offer a tight, self-deprecating laugh, as if I were in on the joke. But every single time it felt like a small death. They weren't just mocking my job, they were mocking my ambition, my intelligence, my very essence. They had created a caricature of me, the odd, work-obsessed daughter with the silly little job, and they preferred it to the real thing. It was easier for them to laugh at the caricature than to see the driven, passionate woman they had chosen not to know. The phone call in November wasn't a new wound. It was just salt in a very, very old one. Christmas Eve descended on Manhattan with a quiet, solemn grace. A fresh blanket of snow muffled the city's perpetual roar, creating an illusion of peace that felt like a personal mockery. I had spent the day in a self-imposed exile, working from home, my laptop a shield against the festive world outside my window. Every time I looked up, I saw wreaths on doors across the street, families carrying brightly wrapped presents, their laughter echoing faintly in the cold air. My apartment, usually my sanctuary of order and control, felt cavernous and cold. It was a space designed for one, a minimalist testament to a life built around work, not connection. The walls were adorned with architectural prints of hotels. The shelves held business journals, not family photos. It was the home of a woman who had poured everything she had into her career because it was the only place she felt truly competent, truly seen. I had tried to manufacture some holiday cheer. I'd bought a small 4-foot Fraser fir and decorated it with a single strand of elegant white lights. It stood in the corner, looking less like a symbol of joy and more like a lonely sentinel. As evening fell, I decided I couldn't bear the silence any longer. I put on a brave face, wrapped myself in my warmest coat, and walked out into the glittering city. I thought perhaps being surrounded by the energy of the crowds would make me feel less alone. It had the opposite effect. I walked past restaurants with steamy windows, catching glimpses of large families gathered around tables, their faces glowing in the candlelight. I saw couples holding hands, friends laughing as they skated at Rockefeller Center. Everyone was part of something. I was just an observer, a ghost haunting the edges of other people's joy. The loneliness was a physical thing, a hollow ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe the frigid air. Defeated, I returned to my apartment. I made a pathetic dinner of toast and tea and sat on my sofa, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. I tried calling my closest friend Sarah, but it went straight to voicemail. Her cheerful recording reminded me she was with her family in Vermont for the week, blissfully out of cell range. I was truly, completely alone. Around 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a social media notification. My stomach tightened. I knew with a dreadful certainty what it would be. Clara was a prolific sharer, meticulously curating an online image of a perfect, enviable life. Tapping on the notification felt like a form of self-harm, but I couldn't stop myself. The photo was exactly as I'd imagined, only worse. It was a professionally lit tableau of my entire family in the grand suite of the Aspen Lodge. My father stood in the center, a proprietary hand on my mother's shoulder, both of them beaming. Clara and Richard were beside them, their smiles flawless. My aunts, uncles, and cousins were all there, packed into the frame, all wearing coordinated gold and red outfits, looking like a cast from a holiday movie. Behind them, a magnificent fire roared in a stone hearth. The caption was a dagger. "Family, the greatest gift of all. So blessed to be with everyone I love this Christmas in Aspen." My thumb swiped, and another photo appeared. A candid shot of my mother and Clara, heads close together, laughing at some shared secret. Then another of my father raising a toast. "To family," the caption read. "Nothing is more important." I scrolled through the album, each photo a fresh stab. There were pictures of my cousins, their spouses, their children. There were friends of Clara's, the ones my mother said were occupying the guest suites. There were the Hendersons, my father's most prized social connection. There was room for all of them. For business associates, for friends of friends, for the entire sprawling clan. There just wasn't room for me. The comments section was a sickening cascade of praise. "The most beautiful family. You all look so happy. Goals. Not a single person asked, "Where's Olivia?" It was as if I had been so thoroughly erased that no one even noticed the empty space where I was supposed to be. I dropped the phone on the cushion beside me, as if it had burned my hand. I stared at my little tree, its lonely lights reflected in the dark glass of the window, and I whispered it out loud, the words tasting like acid in my mouth. "Family? You told me there was no room." The lie of it, the sheer, bald-faced hypocrisy, was what finally shattered my composure. It wasn't just that they had excluded me, it was that they had done it, and then constructed this perfect, joyful narrative that depended on my absence. My non-existence was a prerequisite for their happiness. A wave of grief, raw and overwhelming, washed over me. It was the grief of the 10-year-old with the cheap scarf, the 16-year-old at the science fair, the college graduate with no one to celebrate with. All the hurt, all the slights, all the years of feeling invisible culminated in that one moment, and I broke. I curled into a ball on my expensive sofa and sobbed, my body shaking with the force of a pain I had suppressed for decades. But then, something shifted. As the storm of tears began to subside, a new feeling emerged from the wreckage. It was cold, hard, and utterly clear. It was rage, a clean, purifying rage, the rage of a person who had finally been pushed too far. I sat up, my back straight, and wiped the tears from my face with a fierce, deliberate motion. The sadness was gone, burned away. In its place was a resolve as solid and unyielding as granite. They wanted a perfect family Christmas in a luxury lodge. They wanted to bask in the glow of wealth and exclusivity. They had built their world on a foundation of appearances, of status, of who was in and who was out. And they had just made the fatal mistake of shutting the door on the one person who could burn that world to the ground. My loneliness hardened into a weapon. My pain sharpened into a strategy. The breaking point wasn't a collapse. It was an awakening. I was done crying. I was ready to build. The joke in my family was that I ran motels. They envisioned me in a cheap polyester uniform, handing out keys to dingy rooms with stained carpets. The reality was something I had guarded with the ferocity of a dragon protecting its hoard. The truth was my secret, my power, my silent 5-year rebuttal to every joke and every dismissive glance. The truth was Aurora Hotels. It all started with my great-aunt Eleanor. She was my grandmother's sister, a woman who had never married, never had children, and had built a small but impressive fortune in real estate by being smarter and tougher than every man in the room. She was the only person in my family who ever truly saw me. When I was a child, she didn't give me dolls. She gave me biographies of powerful women. When I told her I wanted to go into hospitality, she didn't scoff. She looked at me with her sharp, intelligent eyes and said, "Good. It's an empire of details. And you, my dear Olivia, have always been a master of details." When she passed away during my sophomore year at Cornell, she left the bulk of her estate to me. It wasn't a staggering fortune, but it was enough. It was seed money. It was a vote of confidence from beyond the grave. My first acquisition was a testament to my naivete and my grit. It was a dilapidated 20-room inn in the Hudson Valley, a place with good bones but a soul that had long since departed. The plumbing was a nightmare. The wiring was a fire hazard, and a family of raccoons had taken up residence in the attic. I used a portion of Eleanor's inheritance to buy it outright. I moved into a small, dusty room in the back and spent the next year of my life bringing it back from the dead. I learned how to patch drywall, how to solder a copper pipe, how to refinish hardwood floors by hand. I hired local contractors who initially looked at me, a 22-year-old city girl, with deep skepticism. But they saw me there at dawn every morning, covered in dust and paint. And they saw me there long after they'd gone home, poring over blueprints. Their skepticism turned into a grudging respect. I obsessed over every single detail. I sourced hand-woven linens from a small company in Portugal. I commissioned a local potter to create unique mugs for every room. I designed a breakfast menu that used ingredients sourced exclusively from farms within a 10-mile radius. When it finally reopened as the North Star, the very first Aurora Hotel, it was a masterpiece of understated luxury. It wasn't opulent or gaudy. It was perfect. Travel Plus Leisure did a small feature on it, calling it a hidden gem and praising its impeccable attention to detail. It was booked solid for the next 6 months. That first taste of success was intoxicating. It was proof to myself that my vision was real, that my passion had value. I took every penny of profit and funneled it into the next project, and the next. I developed a formula: find undervalued properties in breathtaking locations, gut them, and rebuild them to the Aurora standard. A crumbling villa on the coast of Maine became a 15-suite seaside retreat. An abandoned winery in Napa Valley became a world-class resort and spa. Early on, I made a crucial decision. I would build this empire in secret. My family's dismissal had been painful, but it had also given me a gift, the freedom of their low expectations. I knew if they found out, they would try to interfere. My father would want to advise me to take control. My mother would want to use my success for her own social climbing. They would try to claim it, to make it about them. So I buried my identity under a labyrinth of shell corporations and LLCs. The public face of the company was a carefully chosen board of directors and a seasoned president. The ultimate owner, the final decision-maker known only as O. Kane, was a ghost. My anonymity was my greatest asset. It allowed me to move quickly, to negotiate ruthlessly, and to build my brand without any external noise. For 5 years, my life was a study in contrasts. By day, I was O. Kane, commanding boardrooms, reviewing billion-dollar proposals, and making decisions that shaped the luxury hospitality market. By night, and on the rare holidays I spent with my family, I was just Olivia, the quiet, unsuccessful daughter with the motel hobby. I listened to my father drone on about his stock portfolio and my sister brag about her latest shopping spree, all while knowing that the balance of my company's main operating account could buy and sell their collective net worth 100 times over. The duality was exhausting, but it was also my armor, which brought me to the Aspen deal. 6 months ago, my acquisitions team got a whisper of an opportunity. The Aspen Lodge Group, a portfolio of 16 iconic resorts, was in quiet financial trouble. It was the holy grail of mountain luxury real estate, the very symbol of the world my family worshipped. The price tag was astronomical, a $7 billion deal that would empty my coffers and leverage the company to its absolute limit. It was a massive risk. It was also the ultimate checkmate. I knew with every fiber of my being that I had to have it. The negotiations were a brutal 5-month war fought in secret by teams of lawyers and bankers. We finalized the deal the week before Thanksgiving. I signed the final papers, my hand steady, my heart pounding with the knowledge that the world was about to change. We planned the announcement for Christmas Day, a quiet news day, guaranteed to make the biggest splash. As I sat in my apartment on Christmas Eve, looking at Clara's smug photo, I knew my secret wasn't just a business strategy anymore. It was about to become a reckoning. The drive to Aspen on Christmas morning was surreal. I had chartered a private jet, a necessity of my real life that would have scandalized my family. As the small plane descended through the clouds, the majestic, snow-covered peaks of the Rocky Mountains emerged below. They looked pure, powerful, and permanent. I felt a kinship with them. I, too, had been forged under immense pressure. I had planned my arrival with the same meticulous attention to detail I applied to my hotels. I wasn't going to storm in, shouting and causing a scene. That was their style. Mine was quieter, more precise, and infinitely more devastating. I had arranged for the general manager, Arthur Vance, to meet me at a private service entrance. I had spoken to him on video calls dozens of times during the acquisition process, but we had never met in person. He was a tall, silver-haired man with a demeanor of practiced calm, but as I stepped out of the car, I saw a flicker of awe in his eyes. "Ms. Kane," he said, his voice a respectful murmur. "Welcome to Aspen Lodge, or I should say welcome to your Aspen Lodge." "Thank you, Arthur," I replied, shaking his hand. "Is everything in place?" "Yes. The internal staff memo went out an hour ago. The energy is electric. The public announcement is queued up and ready to go live on your signal." "Perfect," I said. "I'm going to walk into the lobby. I'll stand for a moment. Then I'll approach the front desk. I want you to wait exactly 5 minutes from the moment I enter the lobby, and then push the announcement live on every screen in the building." A slow smile spread across Arthur's face. He understood. This wasn't just a corporate takeover. It was a performance. "It will be my distinct pleasure, Ms. Kane." I took a deep, steadying breath and walked through a heavy wooden door that opened from a service corridor directly into the grand lobby. The immediate sensory overload was staggering. The sheer scale of the place was designed to intimidate, to make one feel small and insignificant. A cavernous ceiling with exposed wooden beams soared 3 stories high. A fireplace, a monolith of riverstone, could have comfortably housed a small car. A magnificent Christmas tree, adorned with what seemed like a million twinkling lights, towered in the center of the room. The air was thick with the scent of burning pine, expensive perfume, and self-satisfaction. And there they were, my family. They were holding court near the fireplace, the epicenter of the lobby's social gravity. My father was telling a story, his voice booming, his gestures expansive. My mother stood beside him, a portrait of elegant contentment, Clara and Richard were laughing with another couple, their heads tilted back, their champagne flutes held aloft. They were so perfectly in their element, so blissfully unaware of the predator that had just entered their enclosure. I stood by a marble pillar for a long moment, simply observing. It was how I had spent my entire life, on the periphery, watching them live their loud, bright lives. But this time it felt different. I wasn't an outcast. I was a strategist. I was seeing the board clearly for the first time, and I was holding all the power pieces. The old ache of exclusion was gone, replaced by the cool, thrilling hum of impending victory. After letting the moment settle, I began my walk. I moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace, my low-heeled boots making a soft, rhythmic click on the marble floor. It was a sound that was immediately different from the clatter of ski boots or the shuffle of designer shoes. It was a sound of purpose. A few heads turned. I ignored them. My focus was on the long, polished expanse of the front desk. I reached the desk, and a young woman with a professionally warm smile greeted me. "Good morning and Merry Christmas. Welcome to the Aspen Lodge. Are you checking in?" I met her gaze and gave her a small, genuine smile. Her name tag read Emily. "Hello, Emily." "No," I said, my voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable note of authority. "I'm not checking in. I own this property now." Emily's smile faltered. She blinked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't think I understand." As if her words were the cue, a soft chime echoed through the lobby. And then, in perfect, synchronized unison, every screen in the vast space came to life. The tranquil images of skiers gliding down mountains were replaced by a bold, dramatic graphic, the elegant mountain peak logo of Aurora Hotels. Then came the words, stark and undeniable, in a font that screamed power and money. Aurora Hotels announces landmark acquisition of Aspen Lodge and 15 luxury resorts in 7B global expansion. A collective gasp swept through the lobby. The background chatter ceased, replaced by a wave of frantic, excited whispers. Phones were whipped out, fingers flying across screens. The atmosphere in the room crackled and changed, shifting from lazy holiday relaxation to high-stakes breaking news. And then came the final personal touch. Below the headline, my professional headshot faded into view. It was a picture I'd had taken a month prior, one where I looked directly at the camera, my expression calm, confident, and utterly uncompromising. Beside it, the text resolved, CEO Olivia Kane hailed as the undisputed queen of hospitality. Emily, the receptionist, stared at the screen, then at my face, her jaw slack. "Oh my God," she whispered. You're Olivia Kane." "I am," I confirmed softly. The lobby, which had been murmuring, fell completely silent for a beat. Every head turned, following Emily's shocked gaze to me. In that moment, I was the absolute center of their universe. Slowly, deliberately, I turned my head and let my eyes sweep across the room until they found and locked with the stunned, disbelieving faces of my family. The curtain was up. The play had begun. The moment felt like it was suspended in time. The air in the grand lobby grew thick and still, the only sound the faint crackle of the massive fireplace. My family stood frozen, a perfect tableau of shock. My mother's champagne flute slipped from her numb fingers and shattered on the stone hearth, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. My father's jaw, which had been set in a confident line as he told his story, had fallen slightly open. Clara's face, flushed from laughter just moments before, was now a pale, blotchy mask of disbelief. Her husband, Richard, was the first to react, squinting at the screen and then at me, as if trying to solve a particularly difficult math problem. "Olivia, is that you? What in the world is going on?" My mother's eyes darted between the confident, powerful woman on the screen and the quiet, familiar daughter standing before her. The two images refused to merge in her mind. "Olivia?" she whispered, the name a question, not a statement. It was as if she was seeing me for the first time, a stranger who happened to have my face. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to absorb the full, paradigm-shifting reality of the situation. I was not here for a confrontation. I was here for a coronation. My coronation. "Yes, Mom," I said, my voice resonating with a calm authority they had never heard from me before. I took a slow step forward, away from the protection of the front desk, and into the open space of the lobby, claiming it as my own. "It's me." I let my gaze drift over her, then my father, then Clara. "I know you're all confused. You thought I was running a few budget motels. A little hobby to keep me busy?" A faint, mirthless smile touched my lips. "The truth is a bit more substantial." My father finally found his voice. It was a strangled, angry rasp. "What is this, Olivia? Some kind of elaborate sick joke? Did you pay someone to put that on the screen? He was grasping for a rational explanation, any explanation that would restore his world to its proper order, an order where he was powerful and I was insignificant. A joke? I replied, my voice dangerously soft. Does $7 billion sound like a joke to you, Dad? Does the acquisition of 16 of the world's most iconic luxury properties sound like a prank? I saw the truth land in his eyes, a flicker of raw, terrified understanding. His bluster began to crumble, replaced by a dawning horror. The whispers in the lobby were growing louder now, a rising tide of gossip and speculation. I could hear snippets. That's his daughter? Always thought she was a bit of a black sheep. Bought the whole chain, right out from under them. My family's public humiliation, a fear that governed their every move, was happening in real time. And I was the architect of it. Clara, her face streaked with mascara as tears of rage and confusion began to fall, took a stumbling step forward. Why, Olivia? Why would you do this? To embarrass us? On Christmas? Her voice was shrill, a child's wail of indignation. To her, the universe revolved around her comfort, her image. My success, my power, my story, it was all just an inconvenient, cruel attack on her perfect day. Embarrass you? I said, looking directly at her. No, Clara, this isn't about embarrassment. This is about truth. For my entire life, the three of you have defined me. You told me what I was worth, what I was capable of. You created a small, sad story for me and you forced me to live in it. I took another step closer, my voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. You told me there was no room for me here. You said I'd be awkward, that I'd be alone. You laughed at my ambition. You dismissed my life's work as a joke. My eyes locked onto my mother's. You threw me away. You cast me aside so you could have a perfect family Christmas with people who mattered more. I turned my gaze to my father. And you called me a failure, a disappointment. You were ashamed of me because I didn't choose the life you wanted for me. Finally, I looked back at Clara, and you just laughed along, happy to be the golden child, never once standing up for me, never once seeing me as anything more than a dull backdrop to your sparkling life. I let the accusations settle, each one a carefully placed stone on the scales of justice. Well, I decided to write a different story for myself, a bigger story. And in my story, I am not the guest who gets turned away. In my story, I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the magnificent, opulent lobby that was now mine. I own the house. The color drained completely from my mother's face. My father looked like he had been physically struck. Clara was openly sobbing now, a raw, ugly sound that drew even more attention. Their perfect world, built on a foundation of quiet cruelty and exclusion, had just been publicly and irrevocably dismantled by its primary victim. The looks on their faces were not just shock or anger. It was the terrifying, disorienting look of people whose entire understanding of the world has been shattered in an instant. And it was a look I would never forget. The immediate aftermath of my declaration was a chaotic symphony of whispers, stares, and my family's stunned silence. My father, a man accustomed to controlling every room he entered, seemed to shrink before my eyes. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, utterly stripped of his usual blustering authority. My mother simply stared at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying cocktail of fear, resentment, and a dawning, unwelcome respect. Just then, as if summoned by the sheer drama of the moment, my phone buzzed with the prearranged text from Arthur. I glanced at it, then looked back at my family, allowing a moment for the new power dynamic to solidify in the air around us. Richard, Clara's husband, ever the pragmatist, tried to salvage the situation. All right, Olivia, we get it. You've made your point. A very dramatic point, he said, forcing a tight, placating smile. Now, can we please take this somewhere private? We're making a scene. A scene? I replied, my voice cool and even. I was under the impression this was a family reunion. You just didn't know I'd be attending. Before he could respond, I raised my phone to my ear, a deliberate piece of theater. Arthur, I said, my voice projecting just enough to be heard by those nearby. A quick question about hotel policy. Across the lobby, I saw Arthur nod subtly. He was ready. As the new owner, I continued, my eyes locked on my father. I assume I have some discretion over the guest list, correct? For example, the presidential suite, the one booked by the Henderson family. At the mention of the name Henderson, my father flinched. The Hendersons were his social and financial idols, the very picture of the old money establishment he desperately wanted to be a part of. Their approval was his currency. My mother's hand flew to her chest. Olivia, don't you dare, she hissed, her voice a low, desperate plea. The Hendersons are our guests. You can't possibly— I cut her off, my voice dropping to a businesslike tone as I spoke into the phone. Yes, Arthur. It seems there's been a clerical error, a double booking. It's a most unfortunate situation, but I'm afraid the Henderson party's reservation for the presidential suite will need to be canceled. Please express my deepest, most sincere apologies. The lie was so blatant, so audacious, that for a moment no one knew how to react. My father's face went from pale to a deep, apoplectic red. You can't do that. That's breach of contract. I'll sue you! I'll sue this entire hotel! He roared, his voice finally returning, full of impotent fury. Sue me? I said, lowering the phone and looking at him with an expression of mild curiosity. You are welcome to try, but I'd advise you to read the fine print on your reservation agreement. Management reserves the right to refuse service. And as of 9 a.m. this morning, I am the management. As I spoke, Arthur began to move, gliding across the lobby with a team of 4 security personnel and the head of guest services. They moved with a quiet, efficient grace that was far more intimidating than any overt aggression. They didn't approach me. They approached my family. Mr. and Mrs. Kane, Arthur said, his voice the epitome of professional regret. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, I am so terribly sorry, but there appears to have been an unforeseen issue with your suite. We will of course be refunding you in full, but we must ask you to vacate the premises. Clara let out a choked sob. Vacate? But all our things are up there. My friends, it's Christmas Day. Our staff will be happy to pack your belongings and bring them down for you, Arthur said smoothly, gesturing to a bellhop who was already standing by with a luggage cart. We can also assist you in finding alternative accommodations. My mother grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into the cashmere of my coat. Her face was a mask of sheer panic. Olivia, stop this, please. This is a nightmare. Tell them to stop. We'll do anything. We'll apologize. Just make it stop. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back up at her face. I didn't pull away. I simply let her feel the unyielding stillness of my body, the absolute futility of her plea. You wanted a Christmas with no room for me, I said, my voice barely a whisper, for her ears only. You've got it. There is no room for you here. Not anymore. I gently detached her hand from my arm. The security team had formed a subtle but impassable barrier around my family, politely but firmly guiding them towards the elevators. My father was still sputtering threats, but they were hollow, pathetic. Clara was leaning on Richard, weeping uncontrollably. My mother looked utterly broken, her eyes darting around at the sea of staring faces, her social standing evaporating with every step she took. As they waited for the elevator, she looked at me one last time, her expression pleading. But where will we go? Everything is booked. It's Christmas in Aspen! I gave her the same faint, distant smile I had practiced in the mirror 1,000 times. I believe there's a roadside inn about 10 miles down the highway. It's called the Mountain View. It's clean, basic. I'm sure you'll find it humbling. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. As my family was escorted inside, stripped of their dignity and their presidential suite, the power had not just turned. It had been completely and irrevocably transferred. I had not only checked into the hotel, I had taken the keys to the entire kingdom. The rest of Christmas Day was a blur of controlled professional activity. I met with the hotel's executive committee, my presence a clear and immediate signal that Aurora Hotels was not an absentee landlord. I toured the kitchens, spoke with the concierge team, and approved the menu for the New Year's Eve gala. With every handshake, every decisive command, I felt the last vestiges of the forgotten daughter sloughing off, replaced by the confident, capable CEO I had worked so hard to become. The staff, who had been buzzing with the news, treated me with a deferential respect that was entirely new to me. They didn't see a family drama. They saw a visionary leader. For the first time, I was being judged on my merits, not on my place in a dysfunctional family hierarchy. But as the professional world hummed around me, my personal world was imploding on the screen of my phone. The desperate pleas began less than an hour after they were escorted out of the lodge. They came in a predictable, pathetic sequence. First, the texts from Clara. They were a rapid-fire barrage of frantic, misspelled messages. Olivia, you can't be serious. My life is ruined. Everyone saw! Richard is furious. He says his parents are going to hear about this. Please just call the hotel, tell them it was a mistake. I am begging you. I read them with a clinical detachment. Each typo and exclamation point a testament to her shattered composure. Her world was so small, so fragile, that a moment of public embarrassment constituted a ruined life. I didn't feel pity. I felt a profound sense of distance. We were two different species. Then came the voicemails from my father. They were short, clipped, and dripping with rage. The first one was pure threat. Olivia, you have made a grave miscalculation. You think this is a victory? You have declared war on your own family. There will be consequences. You call me back and you fix this. Now. His voice was the one he used on junior employees who displeased him, a tool of intimidation that had always worked on me before. I listened to it, and for the first time I felt nothing. His threats were meaningless. What could he do? Write me out of a will I never wanted? Disapprove of a life I had built in spite of him? The second voicemail, left an hour later, was slightly different. The rage was still there, but it was undercut by a note of frantic disbelief. I don't understand what you hope to achieve with this stunt. Humiliating your father, is that it? After everything I've given you? You are an ungrateful, spiteful child. When you come to your senses, you know my number. It was a classic attempt to reframe the situation, to paint me as the aggressor, the ungrateful child, and him as the benevolent, wounded patriarch. I almost had to admire the audacity. The pleas from my mother were the hardest to listen to and the most revealing. Her first voicemail was full of tears and accusations. How could you do this to me, Olivia? To your own mother? On Christmas? We are the laughingstock of Aspen. The Hendersons left town. They wouldn't even speak to us. This is all your fault. It was arias of victimhood, with no hint of self-awareness, no acknowledgement of the initial wound she had inflicted. But as the afternoon wore on, and her calls went unanswered, her tone began to shift. The anger dissolved into a raw, desperate pleading. Sweetheart, please pick up. We can't find a room. Anywhere. Everything is booked. Your father is... He's not handling this well. We're just sitting in the car. It's getting cold. Her voice cracked on the last word. A part of me, the old conditioned part, felt a pang of something resembling guilt, but I pushed it away. This was the natural consequence of their actions. They had assumed the world would always accommodate them. They were learning for the first time what it felt like to be on the outside, with no one to call and nowhere to go. The final voicemail from her came just as the sun was setting, casting a beautiful alpenglow over the mountains outside my suite's window. Her voice was small, broken, almost unrecognizable. Olivia, I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. We were wrong. I was wrong. We should have made room for you. We should have always made room for you. Please, honey, don't do this. We're your family, please. We need you. I listened to that message 3 times. The words, we need you, echoed in the silent, luxurious room. For my entire life, that was all I had ever wanted to hear. But hearing it now, under these circumstances, it held no power. It was a cry of desperation, not a declaration of love. They didn't need me, Olivia, their daughter. They needed the CEO of Aurora Hotels. They needed the woman with the power to restore their comfort and their status. The realization was not triumphant. It was deeply, profoundly sad. But it was also liberating. I put my phone on silent and placed it in a drawer. I would not be swayed by their tears, their threats, or their desperate, too-late apologies. They had created this chaos. They could lie in it. I had spent 29 years waiting for their call. Now they would have to learn to live with my silence. In the weeks following Christmas, the story of my family's public dethroning became the kind of delicious cautionary tale that high society thrives on. It wasn't just about the money or the surprise acquisition. It was about the poetic justice, the irresistible narrative of the overlooked underdog rising up to claim her power. The business world celebrated my strategic genius, while the social world feasted on the drama. My own star ascended with breathtaking speed. I was no longer a ghost CEO. I was Olivia Kane, the face of Aurora Hotels. I was featured in Forbes as the billion-dollar bet, and in the Wall Street Journal as the architect of modern luxury. I gave a keynote speech at a global hospitality conference, and my story of building the brand from a single, dilapidated inn earned me a standing ovation. In every interview, I was calm, poised, and forward-looking. I spoke about my passion for service, my belief in sustainable luxury, and my vision for the future of travel. When interviewers tried to pry into my personal life, hinting at the family drama, I would smile serenely and steer the conversation back to business. Aurora Hotels is my life's work, I'd say. A statement that was both a deflection and the absolute truth. My refusal to engage in the gossip only made me seem more powerful, more above the fray. For my family, the fallout was catastrophic. Their social currency, which they had spent their lives accumulating, was rendered worthless overnight. Friends who had once clamored for their invitations now avoided their calls. The boards my father sat on suddenly found reasons to restructure. The charities my mother championed quietly replaced her as the chair of their fundraising galas. They were no longer seen as powerful and connected. They were seen as a liability, the parents who had been publicly humbled by the daughter they had scorned. Clara's life unraveled most spectacularly. Her fiancé, Richard, whose family valued public image above all else, broke off the engagement. The official story was that they had grown apart, but everyone knew the truth. She had become a social pariah, a symbol of ridicule. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved back in with my parents. Her glittering future dissolved into a quiet, suburban shame. I didn't seek out this information, but it found me. Sometimes I would be at a restaurant, and I would overhear a hushed conversation at a nearby table. "Did you hear about the Kanes? Dreadful business." Other times, a well-meaning acquaintance would pull me aside at a party. "Olivia, darling, you're so brave. What your family did. And what you did back!" Simply iconic. I would just smile and change the subject. There was no joy in their downfall. Their ruin was not my victory. My victory was the peace I felt when I was alone. One evening, about a month after Christmas, I was in the penthouse suite of the newly rebranded Aurora Aspen Lodge, the very suite they had been kicked out of. I had flown in for a meeting with the design team about renovations. The fire was roaring in the hearth, the same hearth where my mother's champagne glass had shattered. I stood by the panoramic window, looking out at the snow-covered mountains, a glass of wine in my hand. I thought about the rage and pain that had fueled my journey here. It had been a powerful engine, but it was not a sustainable fuel. I realized, standing there, that the anger was gone. It had burned itself out, leaving behind not emptiness, but a quiet, solid sense of self. I no longer needed their apology. I no longer needed their recognition. Their opinion of me was utterly irrelevant. I had spent so much of my life looking at myself through their eyes, seeing only my flaws and my inadequacies. Now I saw myself clearly. I saw a woman who was resilient, intelligent, and capable. A woman who had taken the scraps they had given her and built an empire. I didn't hate them. Hate was a bond, a connection, and I was finally free of them. I felt a kind of distant, clinical pity for them. They had lost so much, not in money or status, but in the chance to know their own daughter. They had traded authentic connection for a hollow performance, and now the performance was over, and they were left with nothing. My victory wasn't the moment they were escorted out of the lobby. It wasn't in the fawning magazine articles or the ruin of their social lives. The victory was this moment right here, standing alone, in a space I had claimed, feeling whole, complete, and utterly, unshakably at peace. I had finally found a room of my own, and it was bigger and more beautiful than any they could have ever imagined. The calls from my family continued for a few more weeks. They varied in tone, from my father's continued indignation to my mother's pleading, and Clara's attempts to rebuild bridges with awkward compliments about my amazing success. They tried every tactic, every emotional manipulation they had ever used on me. But this time they landed on deaf ears. I had spent a lifetime trying to earn their love, their attention. Now they were trying to earn mine. One afternoon, my mother called again. Her voice was thin, weary, devoid of its usual forced cheer. "Olivia," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, we just want to talk. We're sorry. We made mistakes." I took a deep breath. It was time. Time to close this chapter, not with a bang, but with a quiet, resolute finality. "Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "I'm not going to argue with you, and I'm not going to forget what happened. You told me there was no room for me at Christmas. You made it clear again and again that I wasn't important to you. Now you know what it feels like to be left out, to be dismissed, to be without a room." There was a long silence on her end, punctuated by a shaky sigh. "I don't hate you," I continued, choosing my words carefully. "I don't want to punish you, but I won't let you shrink me anymore. I won't chase after a love you're not willing to give." My mother started to cry softly. "But we're family, Olivia. We'll change. We promise." "No," I said, cutting her off, but not unkindly. "You won't, and I can't keep waiting for you to. I've built a life that is full, a life where I am valued and respected. I can't go back to being the girl you overlooked." I paused, gathering my thoughts, letting the truth settle between us. "I wish you peace, Mom, I really do. But my peace no longer includes trying to fit into your expectations." Then calmly, I hung up. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't wait for another plea. I turned off my phone, placing it face down on the glass table. The silence that followed wasn't empty or lonely. It was full of my own strength, full of my own choices, full of the incredible, hard-won peace that came from finally being free. I walked to my window, looking out at the sprawling city below. The lights twinkled, a million tiny promises of new beginnings. I picked up a crystal glass, filled it with sparkling water and raised it, not to revenge, not to bitterness, but to myself. To the girl who was told there was no room, but who built her own magnificent home. To the woman who finally understood that the greatest gift of all was not family, but self-worth. If you've ever been excluded only to rise higher than anyone expected, hit like. Subscribe for more stories of betrayal turned into power. Comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know.